I went broke many, many times, but the downswings are probably the most important part. And typically with like a breakdown, things are going badly. That's an opportunity for a breakthrough.
All right, today we got Daniel Negreanu. He is here. I've been watching this guy on TV. Feels like half my life. He is a poker player who I think you've had over 50 million in tournament cashes, so tournament winnings. You're known for your ability to read people, for your longevity in the game, for your personality, and how you've built a brand around the game of poker. I think you've won something like, is it 5, 6 World Series of Poker bracelets?
Well, we're at 7, but it should be a lot more if I'm being honest.
And he's humble to boot. So here he is, Daniel Negreanu. Listen, people are going to be like, why are you guys having a poker player on a business podcast? And the reason is, A, I'm selfish. I played poker my whole life, and I wanted to talk to this guy, and that's what the podcast is. But B, there are so many parallels between poker and business, whether it's thinking about it in terms of investing, around bankroll management, around pot odds, and things like there's all these frameworks that I've used for poker in business, but also the people side, the human side, the reading people side, and you were one of the best at that. So thanks for coming on, dude.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right with your description too, because there's just so many things about poker. Poker, you have to register as a small business anyway, right? You're just self-employed and, getting out of bed to go and work is up to you, but you still have to, make smart decisions, invest, and look for plus EV situations.
So, Sam, I don't know if you followed poker like back in the day, the sort of the famous players.
Yeah, and I watched it on TV with Phil Ivey and Daniel. I've seen Daniel so many times.
And they look like a lot of his like Doyle Brunson. They look like cowboys, right? And they had these big personalities. And it was like superheroes who would come to a table, and one guy was just like the stone cold, you can't read him. Another guy was the talker. Another guy, he just was, had no fear gene in his body. He could just risk it all. And that was the sort of persona of like these charismatic, like personality poker players. And then if you fast forward, now it's like hoodie on, sunglasses on, scrawny kid who's doing math, and basically like is in many ways like it's a numbers game, and versus like the way that poker used to have this sort of gunslinger mentality. Daniel, is that accurate how I described it?
Pretty much. I mean, the difference between, and I think this is true with chess and other games too, the difference between like Bobby Fischer was asked, he's like, well, who's the greatest chess player of all time? Right. And he's like, it's not fair. You can't make this, like the players in 1905, right? Brilliant people. They didn't have access to the tools that they have now. So with poker, are these kids more, back in my day, people had to figure it out on their own. Doyle Brunson, before he had computers, he would run simulations by literally getting a deck of cards, a piece of paper and a pencil. He would take an ace and a king against a pair of fours, run out the board and say, okay, ace, king, 1. And he would do it like 100,000 times, right? Now, obviously, the click of a button, you have this data available to you. So it was a different type of skill set. And you're right. A lot of the more modern players are much more deliberate. They take a lot more time because they're actually doing, for the most part, they're doing calculations we didn't used to do. It used to be like this. I'd look at Sam and I'm like, yeah, Sam's full of it. He doesn't have it. I call, right? That's the equation. However, now people are doing what's called, this might be a little bit above your audience's level of understanding, but counting combinations. I'm just saying, because it's even for most poker players, they don't understand like combinatrix, okay? So for example, you think your opponent has ace king. How many ace kings are possible, right? That's a difficult question for somebody who doesn't play poker, right? Well, there's 4 aces and there's 4 kings, right? So that's 16, okay? So what you're doing in your head, or what these people are doing, is they're counting not just ace king as 1, but 16, and then using other effects to decide like, the pot odds, what they have. It like I said, it's kind of complex, and I probably shouldn't go down that.
It's sort of like why like I like this idea of like Babe Ruth, who shows up hungover and like is smoking a cig right before he goes on to like hit, and then now it's just like all jack dudes who just hit home runs and like follow like who are technically perfect. But I'm like, I want the guy who ate steak and eggs in the morning and smokes a cig while he's practicing.
The more updated version of that is absolutely John Daly, right? Tiger Woods was asked one time, like, why do you practice so much, right? Like, why are you up at 4 a.m.? He's like, if I was as talented as John Daly, I wouldn't have to. Because like, really, because Tiger Woods is getting up at 5 a.m., right? 4 a.m. to go golf. And he sees John Daly at the bar, drinking, smoking, whatever. And they tee off at like 9. Right. And, John Daly goes out there and shoots 63. I agree with you, Sam. It's kind of romantic, frankly.
Yeah.
Just that old swashbuckler who just shows up and can still,
Was there a
And-
moment like that hooked you? Because, I think the first poker boom that I was a part of was the Chris Moneymaker thing. And I remember the final table with him and Sammy Farha. And Farha's trying, this kind of experienced player. Moneymaker was this amateur who kind of like won a mini tournament that got him a ticket to the thing. It was like Willy Wonka. He got a golden ticket, then he got in and got all the way there. And I just vividly remember that was great TV. Was there a great TV moment or like a poker final table moment that for you were like, this is awesome, I want to be a part of this?
Well, yeah, I'll answer your question. But first, the moment you talk about, that's the sort of a watershed moment in poker, right? Because it was the first time where some amateur guy named Chris Moneymaker, like you can't make this up, he put $40 in on an online site, turned it into $10,000 seat, sits there, and now he's against the grizzled vet, Sammy Vet, Farha with the cigarette and the suit and the whole old school vibe, and he ends up winning. So that for me, my moment was a little further back. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Rounders.
Yeah, of course. Love Rounders.
Rounders, great movie. So obviously in that movie, Matt Damon is watching a scene between Johnny Chan, the master, and Eric Seidel. I used to watch those tapes as a teenager, and I remember Phil Hellmuth, actually, who's a buddy of mine who I like to needle. I remember watching him as a young, in his 20s. Johnny Chan had won 2 years in a row, and then he was heads up with Phil Hellmuth, and Phil Hellmuth won, this young kid. So in that, it was a little bit inspirational for me. I'm 16. I'm like, I'm going to be the next bat,
Right.
So that was a big moment for me. I believe that was 1989.
Did you, by the way, Shaan, let me ask a question really quick. Have you ever heard Daniel tell the story about Scotty Nguyen?
That's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, I was actually there for that. That was 1998 when I'd won my first bracelet, and I was just coming up on the scene. I was 23 years old, I believe. And, I was there for the final table, and Scotty Nguyen was that guy. He's having a Michelob. That's what he drank. He's smoking a cigarette, He's in the hand. He looks at the guy.
Beautiful mullet. Beautiful mullet.
Beautiful mullet. He's got the black and white, the chains, everything, and then he just gives him the, baby, you call, gonna be all over, baby. That's right. And then he drinks his beer, and it was amazing psychological warfare. I can dig into what happened there. So he's up against the guy who's not a professional, right? Highly stressful moment, okay? You're playing for days, 14 hours a day, 5 days in a row in this smoke-filled room, right? And this guy, Scotty, he's fighting you. He's a pro. And Scotty gives you the out. He says, puts this little idea in his head, if you call, baby, it's going to be all over. No more pain, no more suffering. You get to go, right? So I really believe, and Kevin McBride ended up saying, the comment, what he said, we call that, speech play, if you will, that did it. That was what got him to call, and Scotty won. Scotty Nguyen was the world champion.
That's exactly, Shaan, what Conor McGregor did to Jose Aldo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a sort of mind game to this whole thing. And you're famous for reading people. And I'm curious, there's probably some natural element to it, but it's a practice skill. You've done it a bunch. And in entrepreneurship, in business, there's a big element of reading people. You're doing a deal with somebody, you're selling. It's really important to understand what's going on in the head of the other person and understand where they're coming from. And so I'm curious, like, if you were going to give us like a mini masterclass on reading people, what comes to mind? What are the big factors?
Okay, we're going to start from when you're born and you're a little baby in your mother's arms, right? A little baby can look at their mother and get a sense when mama is happy or sad. How do they do that, right? That's a natural human instinct and ability. And we all have that. We're all born with that. What happens is as we get older, we trust it less and less, right? How have you ever met someone within 3 seconds, there's something, I don't like this guy.
Right.
You have no reason. There's nothing this person did, but something. There was a clue. Something about it just felt off, right? When you're a poker player and you're trying to read people, you trust your instincts in those spots. I used to, no joke. I did this as a teenager when I started becoming professional. I would go to the mall. Okay, I would sit on a bench. I'd wear sunglasses so people didn't think I was a weirdo, and I'd watch people walk by, and I'd get a sense of who is this person? Were they picked on in high school? Are they confident? Are they, are they insecure? Are they depressed? Are they happy? Was this guy a football player? And I'd make up these stories in my head to try to get an idea. So when I sit at a poker table, everything from what you're wearing to what you do, where you're from, that sort of is a puzzle where I'm profiling. I'm, essentially profiling people, which we all have the capacity to do. And in business, of course, it's super important, right? A guy comes and tells you, oh, we had a great first quarter. It was unbelievable. Yeah, we broke records. Why are you telling me all this right here, the way you are so blusterful? Probably because it's baloney. You know what I mean? Because so you have to like get a sense for, and often what you do with people is when they're lying, You want to like remember what they look like when they're lying and look for that pattern again. I'll give you a simple example with poker. It was in Europe, World Series Europe. I played with this guy on day one and he was chewing gum. Okay. Well, I was watching and there was this hand where he was chewing gum. And then he bet all his money. He was all in. He stopped chewing. Wasn't chewing his gum anymore. So I'm like, I really want to see this hand. He turned it over. He was bluffing. Okay. So I banked that in my memory. Now on day 4 days later, a big spot between me and him at the final table. He bets all his chips, right? He's chewing away. I throw the hand away. Okay. Later, he bets all his chips. He's not chewing anymore. I call, he's bluffing. I'm able to knock him out of the tournament. So absolutely we all have that ability. I think it's really observation, noticing and looking for patterns because everyone's unique and different. But there's some tried and true, examples. Like if people are not looking you in the eye, typically like they look away or they look down to the right because they're uncomfortable about you looking at them because they're doing something that they should, or they're saying something that they shouldn't be saying, or they're lying to you.
Can we actually invert that? So let's just say that I think, you've been involved in owning and investing in a handful of companies. If I was trying to get you to invest in my company and I wanted to successfully lie to you, what would the checklist be that I would follow?
I think certainty for sure, but again, this is the thing. The best con artists are also the best liars, right? So they'll fool you, right? Like, I'd say an over exuberance of confidence though is problematic. Like if you're just too like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing, da da da. If you actually acknowledge, both good and bad, right? So you're like, listen, we're in great shape. However, we really got to work on this. So sort of admitting being humble almost like, 'cause that shows some honesty. Like, wow, okay, well, this guy, why would he tell me this bad thing, if the other part's not true? So if you were going to lie to me about A, tell me the truth about B that doesn't look good for you. And now A is far more believable to
So
me.
I would be confident but self-deprecating a bit and admitting to flaws. What else would I do?
Well, there's honesty there. I think, looking the person in the eye, is a big one. And I think also like never come off as desperate.
All right, I read a ton. I would say almost a book a week. And the reason I read so much is because my philosophy towards reading is I want to see what worked for the winners that I love and what strategies they use. And then I want to see what mistakes did they all make? What were the common flaws that they all had? And I just want to avoid that. And so HubSpot asked me to put together a list of the books that have changed my life so far in 2025. And I did that. And so I listed out 7 books that made a meaningful difference in my life. And I explained what the difference is that they had on me or what actions I took because of the book. And then also I listed out my very particular ways of reading because I'm pretty strategic about how I read and how I read so much and how I remember what I read and things like that. And so I put this together in a very simple guide. It's 7 books that had a huge impact on my life. And you can scan the QR code below if you want to read it, or there's a link. You guys know what to do. There's a link in the description. Just go ahead and click it, and you'll see the guide that I made. So it's the 7 books that had a massive change in my life this year so far, and then also how I'm able to read so much. So check it out below.
What's an example of not being desperate and also of being desperate?
Yeah, I'd say, okay, so, desperate people, they front load the pitch too much and the ask, right? Like if you really want to pitch somebody, you want to play the long game, don't even make an ask, just be like, man, I'm working on this really great project. It's fantastic. Da, 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 da. Then at the end of it, don't even ask for anything. Don't even say anything. Well, ask him. Hopefully, if you've pitched it well, subtly, he's going to ask you. Yeah. Right. Now, how much better is it when he says like, well, so you guys taking money for investments? Like, yeah, we are. But, we're in round 1. It's not that we're fine. Like we got money, but like, hey, listen, we're always open to listen to people. So now you've flipped it on him, right?
Right.
So instead of like you selling him, he's like, oh man, I want in on that, right? That's like a really solid way to, get people on board with your vision, I think.
You mentioned that when you were on your come up, you'd go to the mall, you sort of practice just your observational skills, like without distraction, actually just observe people, try to really like understand how, how they move, how they think, try to build up a profile of them. What were the other things you did to get good, right? Like you don't just become who you became without doing something that was uncommon. If you just did the common set of actions, you would have had a common result. You must have done something uncommon to get you an uncommon result. What else did you do on your come up that was very helpful for you?
Yeah. On that note of observational, we'll go. I don't know if you guys remember a show called Heroes many years ago. There was a character called Siler, and all these people had like, superhero type talents, right? And he would go in there and he'd like pull their brain out, and he would now have this, ability himself. So when I started out quite young, I would play with people and I'd start to notice the same guys are winning, right? So I'm like, okay, this week I'm getting inside Sam's head. I'm going to be like, I'm going to sit like him. I'm going to put my chips like him. I'm going to sort of try to become him for this week and understand exactly how he thinks. Okay, now I take all the good, I leave the bad. Now I move on to Shaan, and I'm like, okay, let's be Shaan for this week. Let's really soak in what makes him successful. Why is he winning, right? The idea is to create this super player where I take the best skills from all these different people, look at what works and what doesn't, and then formulate like, a game plan that way. So really for me, it was learning from those that are already successful. And that's easier to do today than it's ever been. Like I'm going to be streaming later today, playing for 8 hours. You can watch me play for 8 hours and see my hole cards and hear me explain my thought process, right? So without even risking any money at the poker table like we used to have to, you could just watch and learn that way. Then you start to think outside the box just from observation. So I had a group friend that we ultimately did start talking poker, but early on, it wasn't like that. Early on, I wasn't going to go up to him and be like, "Hey, would you just tell me all your strategies? Thanks." Cool.
So the listeners are going to hate hearing this story again because I say it 10,000 times, but I previously owned a media company that I sold, and it was wonderful. And when I sold the company, I sold it it was during COVID. I sold it via Zoom. And so it was a lot of phone calls and it was a lot of Zoom. You've talked a lot about negotiating and like being able to read someone, but it's very physical. Is there a way that you could teach me how to be better to read or to understand what someone's thinking via Zoom or phone calls? Like, can you hear in someone's voice or just see them on a camera, or do you think you have to be in real life?
Yeah, well, obviously, you can with Zoom, but I think, frankly, let's say, for example, when it comes to business, I think, and this would be my go-to. I think the best way to get reads on people is when they are relaxed. Okay. When are they relaxed? So not during a business call, not during Zoom, everyone's buttoned up, and like ready to talk. How about when you guys go for dinner and drinks? Just like, hey, we should go check out this restaurant and have some drinks or whatever. And then talk about things unrelated to business. Understand who these people are, get a sense of who they are, and sort of disarm them. I do this in poker all the time, right? Where I'll give you an example of what I do often. The idea is I want the person to be relaxed and I'll get more from them. So I'll be in a spot where my opponent, they bet all their chips. So it's decision on me. Instead of looking at them, I look at the dealer and I go, why did I do this to myself? This is what I always do. And then I see him over there to the corner of my eye. I see him laughing, right? He's giggling. So that means he thinks he has the best hand, right? So I'm looking at the dealer and saying, yeah, okay. I said, what if he just has only like ace jack? And then I look at his face and he goes, hey, shit. That is, and I can beat that. So all of a sudden the demeanor, but the thing is he's disarmed because I'm not looking at him, right? So the analogy there with business is you're still at that dinner meeting, at those drinks, whatever you're doing, you're in reading mode. Then that is when you're gonna get the best reads on who this person is and how they think. And there'll be, especially with a little bit of alcohol, they'll be probably a little looser with the lips, and disarmed. And that makes it much easier. It's much more difficult when everyone's very, very stiff, to get authentic reads because it's practiced, right? Like if you're taking a pitch from somebody, they've probably done this pitch before. So they're just sort of like going through the motions, and that's not authentic. That's not real. You need to see the real. And usually that happens away from those environments.
Is there a certain body part? Because you're describing this example of like poker where you say, what's he got, ace jack? And you said he stopped smiling, but it's never that, or it doesn't, to someone like me who doesn't know what I'm looking for, it doesn't seem that obvious.
Yeah. Well, there's a myriad of examples. The eyes are very, very telling often, like in poker and otherwise. But the other one too is, and this is why, like I said, I like to use this as a strategy, is a smile. If you looked at 10 smiles right now, and I showed you 10 and 5 are real and 5 are fake, you'd be surprised how good you are at telling which ones are fake and which ones are real, right? Like a fake smile is one that's kind of like this. A real smile, you see more up stuff up here like that. So that's a, telltale sign. But like I said, everybody's unique. The eyes are probably the most telling. Body language too. Body language is a big one, right? Are they, when they're talking, are they stiff? Are they like this? Or are they laid back in their chair? They're talking, because if someone's laid back in their chair, they're not really afraid of you looking at them. They're comfortable. You can sense when someone's comfortable versus not. And like I said, everyone's unique and individual, but body posture, eyes, Smiles. A lot of guys are looking at Pulse now. That's like a new thing. So everyone's covering their necks, of course, with scarves and things like that.
Shaan, have you guys ever heard this story? So in 1991, the election between, I think it was 92, the election in 92, it was between George Bush Sr. and it was Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton, their reputations weren't entirely known. The reputations eventually are going to be that Bill Clinton is this charismatic young guy and who can like woo people. And then George Bush Sr. was known as kind of a uptight, not everyday type of guy. And there's this famous debate where a lot of like political folks say this is when George Bush Sr. lost to this up and coming guy. This young lady in the crowd was asking a question about a very everyday thing, like I can't afford groceries. And while she's asking the question, George Bush Sr., very subtly, he looked at his watch like that. Boom, it's over. And then the analysts go, look at Bill Clinton. He grabs the mic, he walks closer and he goes, what did you say your name was? Can you tell me about your background? What do you do for work? Man, it's so hard to hear what you're going through. I'm so sorry. And look, a decade later, they did this test where what they did was they got rid of the audio of the video and they just showed you the body language of the two people, Bush and Bill Clinton. And then this other test, you could only listen to the audio. And what they found was the people who only watched the video and didn't hear the audio could predict exactly what happened to the outcome, whereas the people who only listened to the audio, they couldn't exactly tell what happened.
Right.
And so the idea being is that body language and seeing with your eyes communicates significantly more than just audio. And it was this amazing story where it was literally just this. Like you just looked at his watch just like that. And that was the end of the election. That's what a lot of people have folks say. Have you guys ever heard that?
I remember that too, and it makes so much sense. It's so on point, right? Because like the difference there is, like you said, Bill Clinton got personal. The body language mattered. How often are you talking to somebody like today in our age? Like people have cell phones, right? Like you're talking to someone and they're just going, yeah, uh-huh.
Right.
Do you feel like you're being listened to? Really? Like, oh yeah, you feel like you're being ignored. You feel like you're being dismissed versus somebody puts their phone down and looks at you and goes, uh-huh. And they give you a head nod or whatever like that. Like that person is someone you're more likely to want to engage with or feel respected by. Right. So that like what the example you gave is George Bush in that moment, people see that as that's disrespectful. That's the same as looking at your phone. What did Bill Clinton do? Oh, that was very empathetic. What do you do? Where are you from? Tell me about your story. Oh, wow. Well, like, just look at those two different people, right? Just on that alone. Like, it's such a drastic difference.
Right. When you, how did you get into poker? So what's the origin story for you? And I'm curious if it just worked right away or you hit some rock bottoms early on and it sort of shifted you.
Yeah. So I started as a teenager. I was a pool player. I was playing snooker. In Canada, we play snooker. And through that, you make some friends up there and they say, we're going to go play some poker. Okay. So I don't know what that is. I get a 6-pack of beer, bring my $10 that I got, lose that real quick, drink my beer, and I'm watching for the most part after. And they're playing these crazy wild card games, Follow the Queen, all these stupid games, right? But I'm watching, and we started to do that a little more regularly. And I thought it was all luck, right? And then I started to like, what's going on here? How come the same 2-3 guys just seem to always win, and these guys always lose? And that's what intrigued me because I've always been very competitive. So I actually remember buying a really bad book back then, and I was like, it was very elementary. And I was like, okay, well, but it helped, because it was something to make me think about the game more sophisticated way. But it took me about a month or two until I started to, figure things out. But through that, my origin story, like I was building up money, but I'm a teenager and I'm reckless. So, you got money, you lose it. The good news was I had people around me that started to see that like, okay, he's good at poker. He's good for it. He's an honorable guy. So when I would go broke and lose all my money, I could borrow money from people, whether it was $500 or $1,000 back then. And that, I went broke many, many times, but that's part of the learning experience, I think. I think like the relation to business is essentially this, like if you have like very little to lose, like you have a very small company or whatever, you can take shots, right? Because whatever, you lose, you lose. Now, once you become a big company, I remember I spoke at Kraft Foods once. They had me on at a corporate event. And actually one of the people asked, he's like, what would you do with Kraft mac and cheese? It's been like our staple. And I used the poker analogy and I said, listen, if I had a $500 bankroll, that's I can replicate that. Like I can get that. But once I have $2 million, I can't really risk the whole $2 million to go back to 500 because it's too much, right? So when I was broke, I would take shots like this. But once I've an established brand, if you will, once I've got the money, I wouldn't mess with it too much because they wanted to change the recipe and the packaging and all that. And I said, listen, if it's working, why mess with it? There's a risk there. And I would say that when you're taking risk, you take risk when you're on the low end of the totem pole. That's exactly when you take them, especially in your 20s, whatever, you take risk. But once you've established, you should be way more risk averse. So I play poker for a living, but when it comes to investing and all that stuff, I know nothing about it, but I'm very risk averse. I have a guy, Morgan Stanley guy, municipal bonds. I don't even know what it is, right? But it's safe stuff. Like I don't gamble needlessly at this point because I've already created the dream life that I want. So what's the point?
Right. There was a guy, I was in college and I took one class my senior year called Getting Rich. And it was probably, I was a pre-med kid. So this was like, I'd done all the hard physics, biology, whatever. This was like my blow-off class. Turned out to be the most valuable class I took my entire college career. They invited in this guy from a hedge fund, or maybe it was a venture capital fund. So this VC comes in and he's like, okay, cool. Like, who here wants to start a business someday? And so like, I would say like 75% of the kids raised their hand. Like, hey, I like the idea. I'd like to own my own business. And he goes, awesome. Who here is going to start a business? Like you're all graduating seniors, right? So who's going to start a business this May when you graduate? And the 75% of hands dropped, and there was like 2 or 3 hands left. And he goes, "What just happened?" He's like, "That is," so he started asking people. He goes, "You said you want to start a business. Why aren't you doing it now? Like, what's coming first?" "Oh, I got this great job at McKinsey. I got this job at a bank, Goldman Sachs, wherever. I got this internship." So I'm going to do that for a few years, get some experience, and then I'm going to go do the business thing. And he goes, he said, "You guys have it backwards." He goes, "When you're 21 and 22 years old and you can live off of a futon and, you have no mortgage, you have no kids, and you have no expectations." He's like, "This is the time to just go broke repeatedly." He goes, "You should just try so many businesses during this era. Don't wait till you're 28 to 32 because that's when it's going to feel a lot harder and a lot more costly to go start that business because you're going to have a better salary, you're going to have a job, you're going to have a reputation. You're not going to want to be a beginner in your 30s. You should be a beginner in your 20s. And literally that shifted the course of my life where I was like, oh, he's right. I should just go. I can afford to go broke several times now, similar to poker. Like when you have a small bankroll is when you want to take the most risk and because you can recover and bounce back quickly. You don't actually have that much to lose. So when you were you said you started when you were in your teens and you started learning the game and you would go broke, but then you would borrow some money, you get back in it. What happened from there?
We're very good. People are very good at thinking of all the reasons why something's not going to work and something's going to fail. So it's very easy to be like, oh, I want to start this business, but I don't have the money. It's not good timing and do this. And it's like, when I'm set and everything's good, then I'll do it. And I remember I did a course years ago on sort of emotional intelligence, and there's this thing called be, do, have, right? Many people think you need to have everything in order to be something, right? Where the truth is, it's like, be it, right? Do it and you'll have it. Just live like you got, go for it if a little bit more, like you said. As for me, to segue into your second question, that's kind of what I did. I went for it. I went to Vegas, and I remember the first time I went to Vegas, I had $3,000. 24 hours later, I did not. But I had 3 more days in Vegas with no money. Learning experience, got kicked in the nuts, went back home to Toronto, rebuilt, kept going back. So it was a trial and error thing where I went from being the big fish in a small pond in Toronto to the top pros, And I remember a very distinct moment when that happened. It was 4 a.m. and I was playing 7-handed, 7 people at the table. And I lost my money, and I went to the bathroom, washed my hands, came out, and they're all gone. And I realized in that moment, I was the sucker. They were only playing because of me. I was their EV. I was their expected value. And I remembered every one of their faces with vengeance, right? And I said, I'm going to get you one day. One of them was a guy named Hawaiian Bill. He'd wear those Hawaiian shirts or whatever. And hated him, at the table because he was playing aggressive. I was like a bull. He just knew how to beat me. And then about a year or 2 later, he sort of became a little bit of a mentor of mine, because I was like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. He's been around the block and I'm going to learn from him instead of, being angry. And, I just eventually, I had persistence, I understood that and I had many walks home from the casino to my motel where I wondered, what am I doing? I'm not in school. I'm not going anywhere and this is it. So good news is I'd wake up in the morning ready to go. I'm like, all right, today's the day. Let's turn it around.
There's that one of my favorite scenes is from a movie, is a poker movie. It's with Mark Wahlberg, where he's talking to John Goodman. And do you guys know what scene I'm talking about? Where he basically says, like, I was up 2 million and I lost all of my money. And John Goodman's like, look, every idiot knows that when you're up 2 million, we all know what to do. You take 1 million and you buy a house, and then you buy a really crappy car, and you put the rest in savings, and that's your fortress of solitude. You can never mess that up. And then you go and gamble with the rest, but you never screw that one bit up. And he like tells this amazing story. Was there a point in your life, or at least, or rather, what point in your life, or what age were you, where you're like, okay, I have a base. I have my fortress of solitude. Things feel good. How late into life were you, or how early into life were you before you felt some security? Because it sounds like your line of work, it's a lot of ups and downs. Was there ever like okay, I'm at a place of safety?
The first time it happened, I was very wrong. So I'll go there and then I'll tell you about when it actually happened. 1999, had a good year. I won the U.S. Poker Championship to end the year. I had like, 400, 500,000. I thought, okay, well, we're set. We're good. We're never going to go broke again. Then in the year 2000, I got complacent. I was living the Vegas life. We're going to strip joints. We're going to dinners. I go play poker, gambling, not taking it as serious as I should. And oh, wow, by the end of the year 2000, the money gone, right? And I was like, it was a good learning experience. I'm glad it happened because I watched many of my peers who went through this pattern of building up a bankroll, blowing it all, and then rebuilding it again. And part of that was they didn't have a foundation, like actually a reason. They didn't have a why, right? So they wake up in the morning, what's their goal? They got to go make money, right? Now they have money, okay? Well, what's next? So subconsciously, they self-sabotaged. They would self-sabotage, lose all the money, so they had a purpose again, And I remember watching my peers do that, and I said to myself, I'm not going to be that guy. So I started to take things more seriously in the early 2000s, and probably by my late 20s, early 30s, I'd say, is when I finally realized that, like, I got it figured out. I've got enough money. We're for sure not going broke anymore. Even though we're playing higher stakes, I'm much more careful than I was. But that was a very important year for me to fail the way that I did in the year 2000, to really just bottom out in a sense. And then that's a decision point. Am I going to just keep doing what they do and be 50 or 60? I mean, I watched a guy, no joke, he built up. I used to play with him in small games where, maybe he had 1,000 or 2,000. He's playing the big game where he's got $2 million, right? And then
Does that mean he had 2 million saved, or he was betting that game 2 million was on the line?
He had 2 million total. Like that's what he would, that's his bankroll is 2 million. Now he's up there playing the big game. He's got a couple ladies with him. He's doing blow. He's drinking, whatever. 3 days later, this guy who had 2 million in front of him, he comes up and he says, hey man, can I get 500? Because he's back to nothing, right? So he wants 500. And I saw that and I was like, wow, man, you had 2 million and you blew all that. And there's a lot of crazy stories like that. And I knew I was never going to be that guy, but it was a real wake up call, right? Mm-hmm. Guys I looked up to in a sense. And I'm like, what are you doing, man?
What's the biggest what's the biggest amount that you saw someone have and it go to zero?
Well, I don't know the guy personally necessarily, but this famous story was Archie Karras, who was the craps player. A little bit of a cheat and all these kind of things at the Binion's Horseshoe. He went there and he was winning like $1 million a day. He had like 45 million. He had every $5,000 chip that the Binion's Horseshoe had. He had them all in his safety deposit box. He had 45 million. Lost it all. And then this for a second time, he was able to build up a bankroll to about 17 or 18 million and lost it all. So this is a degenerate, right? Like his whole life revolves around this. And this is where I don't relate to people that are billionaires in a lot of ways that still are looking to make money. I don't get it. Like, I can't relate to it. Like, you have $1 billion. Why do you care so much about a deal that just made you 20 million that's going to do nothing to change your life? So that sort of obsession of a bigger yacht or matching up with my others. I have friends that are billionaires and stuff like that. And one of them actually wrote a book, Bill Perkins, because he does it right. He wrote a book called Die with Zero, right? Which essentially he talks about how money is just a tool for, to give you opportunities to have happiness. And what is happiness? It's not a bigger yacht. It's not a watch. It's not a car. It's experiences, right? So he talks about spend your money. Think about that. Like if you look back, like in your last 10 years of your life, You bought a watch a while ago. Did that give you happiness that was long lasting? What about the trip you took with your boys when you went on a golfing trip and you went to like the south of France? Like that's something that's valuable to you now. Like you still have those memories and, you know, a life that's worthwhile. So material objects, material things, I think that's where, frankly, the opposite happens. It'll instead of making you happy, it'll make you vehemently unhappy if that's the only source of happiness that you find.
Yeah, it's also funny, like it's almost frustrating because it's like I keep going to this well, trying to scoop up some happiness, and there's just none there, right? If you keep trying the same strategy and it's not working, it's actually not just that you didn't get happiness, you actually get frustrated because
diminishing returns, right?
You're getting diminishing returns. Yeah, exactly.
It's like you get that, you take, but I don't do kick. I've never done cocaine. But the more you do it, you know, you have that little fleeting dopamine hit, but the more you do it, the more your body becomes accustomed. It doesn't even have that same effect. Same thing, I think, with material objects. You have 6 cars. Okay, now, I'm going to buy this 7th car and this 8th car. What now? Like, it's becomes like unimportant.
So what motivates you then? Because you're playing a game that's literally for money. It's the chips on the table. The goal is to get the chips from the other guy into your little pot. And so, why do you do it? You've made plenty of money and, you don't have to keep playing. So what is it for you?
Well, that's the hook, really. That's the trick. I think the majority of a large percentage of successful people became successful doing what they're doing because they love what they're doing, right? If you don't love what you're doing and your chances of being successful are very slim. So if you just say, I want to be rich and famous, okay, but do you want to do the work? What do you like to do that gets you there? And if you're doing something because you think it's going to get you money, but you don't enjoy it, you don't have that passion for it. I always did. I love competing. I would have loved to be an athlete, but I'm like 5'9" and like $106. I'm too tall to be a jockey and too short to be a basketball player, right? So I didn't have any talent in that regard. But poker was a battle of wits, right? And I love the game. And when I started playing it, I wasn't playing for money. Money was a tool. I wanted to play in bigger games. I wanted to play with the best, right? So the only way to do that was money. So money wasn't the end goal, right? Ultimately, what money provided me was, and I always ask this whenever I would coach people, like, people say, well, what do you want? What's your dream? I want to be rich. Okay, but for what? To do what? Like, what are you going to use it for? Because money itself is just a pile of notes or a number on your screen. It doesn't do anything. What do you want it for? And for me, it was to provide myself the freedom to be able to do whatever I want, in my 30s, 40s, and 50s. If I want to travel, if I want to relax, if I want to stay at home, not have to go to a day job, and be my own boss. So that's what I looked at as far as money goes. Like, the truth is, my bank account, if it was 10x what it is now, my life wouldn't change much at all. Like,
right.
Maybe I'd have a plane, but
isn't it funny? Isn't it funny how the line between degeneracy and loving it, like we could be describing very similar things. Like, for example, I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I love it. But then my wife or someone else would be like, well, you're just a degenerate. Like,
you're a workaholic.
Yeah. Like, there's, it's kind of interesting when you describe it in the way that you describe it. I'm like, gambling's awesome. And then when I think of it, I'm like, Larry the Greek or whatever, Archie the Greek, he's he's a degenerate. But couldn't he describe it as the same way? I loved it.
Yeah. Doyle Brunson had that famous quote once. It was on a TV show where they asked him, and he said, we're all really just degenerate gamblers. We just found something we could beat. Right?
Yeah.
So he was, a lot of the old school guys, they gamble on everything. Poker players, they didn't just play poker. They'd play, golf for big money, bet on every game, bet on everything, some really famous bets from back in the day, some really cool ones, but they're always looking for action or EV. And a lot of it is because it gets their juices flowing. But I found, like I said, for me, that's not the be all end all. Like, it doesn't do it for me. I'm not really a thrill seeker in that way. Like, people say, oh, you should bungee jump or jump out of a plane. I'm like, I have zero interest in that. Zero. It's just dumb for me because it doesn't do what it does for other people. Like, some people go, oh my God, it was the thrill of a lifetime, whatever. I'm like, for me, I just look at it and go, oh, you might die. So what's the point? Like, if I believe that it would give me that thrill, I would, maybe take it on, but it doesn't do it for me.
You mentioned loving the competition. Who's the best poker player you've ever sat down at the table with? Has there ever been anybody you sat down and you're like, wow, this guy's better than me?
Yeah, for sure. Several. One of them is my good friend who I've been friends with for 30 years. And he did what I didn't. I'll tell you, we sort of split in terms of like our focus. He's the best poker player in the world as far as I'm concerned when you count all the games, and that's Phil Ivey. Okay? So Phil Ivey and I took different paths. There was a time where poker started to get popular on TV, and there's all these opportunities and this and that. He was not about that. He didn't like that. He was nose to the grindstone. I'm going to sit my leather ass in this chair and I'm going to play for 10 hours. I'm going to make all the money. And I had that when I was younger, but then I saw these other opportunities to be, sort of a name in the game and potentially get some money through sponsorships or different the business side of poker. And I was more well suited to that than he was because I enjoyed it. When I was a very young kid, I wanted to be an actor. So being on camera, speaking, these types of things, that was comfortable for me. So I felt like I could position myself to do quite well that way. And I did, and he went a different path and, did well his way. But the difference is once I start doing that, my focus is now diverted, right? He's focused on one thing and one thing only, just this game of poker, right? I'm playing poker, but I'm also doing this stuff too, right? So the intensity with which he plays at, I can't reach, right? Because I've got other things going on, you know what I mean? Which is fine. I don't regret it, looking back. But I think that's part of why, what made him so successful. He was completely consumed by poker and nothing else.
So he's completely intensely focused on it. What's his kind of like superpower? So like if yours is the ability to sort of like get inside the mind of the other person and read them and try to be able to see through the cards, what's his superpower?
He was he was quiet. He was a quiet assassin when he played, but he's paying attention to everything. He sees everything, right? So he'll sit in a game for cash and he'll see like 15, 20 minutes in, the wrong guys are winning. Okay. What does that mean? The wrong guys are winning. Okay. Well, the wrong guys are winning means they're going to play well because sometimes when people are winning, they play well. And when they're losing, they're going to go off for a big number. So sometimes he'd go down there and he'd play for 15, 20 minutes, see there's nothing here, and he'd leave. He'd go home. Or other days, he's there for 4 days without, leaving his chair because he sees that they're vulnerable, right? Often in that environment, it's all a bunch of sharks. So let's say it's all sharks, right? So every shark is circling each other and they see one shark is wounded. Oh, one shark lost his tail. Ho, 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 ho. We're going to rip this shark apart, right? It's a dog-eat-dog world in that sense. And he was the king of that. And still, still has that killer side of intensity. Yeah, I would say it's just his ability to like dial in and have like uber focus.
If you had to teach me, someone who, frankly, I've never even been to a casino really, how to like keep calm under pressure in these high stakes games, you and Phil, I have you as my coach. We're going to spend like 3 days in a hotel before we go down, like preparing. Not the actual like math or the cards, what would you teach me? What would be my checklist on how to be calm in a stressful situation?
Yeah, well, first of all, virtually impossible. It's okay. Like in a 3-day span, because here's the thing, it's an emotional thing, right? I mean, I would, you can do like a meditative retreat, a yoga retreat, learn to get Zen, learn to get centered, all these types of things. But in 3 days, entering an environment you've never really experienced before, dealing with that sort of stress, that's a you thing, right? We could like set you right with, explaining like it's all part of the, there's things you could probably do, but over 3 days to somebody that's completely new, I would say that you wouldn't be an easy person to help in that regard. You're just going to have to go through it on your own. Now that's different for people that have played the game for years, right? I can, get them to focus on the fundamentals of what they're doing, right? Are you making good decisions? Okay, let's focus on that. Okay, let's not become victims to the idea that like, oh man, I'm so unlucky. That does you no good. There's no value.
So being input focused, not output focused.
Focus on the journey, right? So in poker, it's not like other things where if you make the right decision, you make money. That's not how poker works. I can go all in with a pair of aces, right? And Sam could say, I have a 9 and a 4, I'm going to go all in. Well, that's a good situation for me, but sometimes I'm going to lose. But did I make a mistake? No. In the long run, I'm going to be okay. So for you or for anybody else, I would usually probably ask like what your life experience is with other things, right? Like, so let's say you're somebody who plays the market. Okay, I would maybe make an analogy. Like, okay, so sometimes you make good investments and then something completely uncontrollable happens and, your investment goes to nothing. Doesn't make your decision bad, right? Your decision was good, right? So focus on that. Instead of like, woe is me, go, okay, well, or alternatively, if you lost and it was you didn't see something, you're like, I missed this. That was important. Okay. So use that, you use that mistake or that breakdown, if you will, to plug a hole, and be better prepared the next time you see it. Poker is like essentially like a big puzzle right? Where you start out and you just make all these mistakes. And now you start to like go, okay, I've got this one figured out. And you continually plug leaks, or you've seen these situations so many times where you go, aha, I made this mistake before, but I'm in the same situation now, or a very similar one. This time I'm going to do the right thing.
What are the most common leaks? Because you've coached people and people ask you for advice for years. What are the most common leaks that like a smart, competent player still has that kills them? That's really hurting their gain. So like, they're not at that beginner level, but they're sort of like, intermediate, and they are a smart person. They have enough talent. What leaks do they have?
I'd say a pretty common leak for 99% of poker players or gamblers in general is when they're winning, everything's great or whatever. They don't play as long. Okay. They'll be like, all right, I'm going to take my winnings. I'm going to leave. Whereas when they're losing, they're there for days. I'll give you a perfect example. My friend Evelyn, my ex-girlfriend, we'd go and she'd win like every day almost, It's like, how'd you do? Well, I won 100, I won 200, I won 300, da, da, da. Then I look at like day 9 and it says I lost 3,700. Okay. So you won 9 out of 10 days, right? But what's the difference? You won 100, 200, 300. So over those 10 days, because of your mental state, when you were winning, the situation was good and you should be pressing and pushing, right? That's when you a lot of people just be like, I'm gonna just take my winnings. That's the opposite of what a Phil Ivey would do, as I was sort of described. But when she was losing, she wasn't there because I looked at the length of play. The first 6 days, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, nothing more than a 4-hour session. That one she lost 3,500, she was there for 31 hours, right? So the biggest leak people make is they chase losses in the short run, right? So like, I have to get even today. It's not, this game isn't today. This game doesn't end today. This game is all year, all month, all year. You have to be able to say, okay, well, because the thing is when you're losing, your mental state is going to be affected. There's very few robotic minds that can play poker without having that affect them to some degree. So you're better off playing in situations when your mental state is good, you're winning, versus when you're bad.
Have you ever read The Inner Game of Tennis, Daniel?
No.
We talked about it on here, and what you're describing is exactly that. So it's this amazing book. I don't play tennis, but it's about how to play tennis, but it's one of these books where it teaches you about life. And the concept of the book is basically that you have two selves. Self one is like the conscious, critical mind, where you like judge yourself, like, oh, that was a bad hit, that was a bad hand. Self two is like, you don't think, you feel your body. And that when you like listen to your body and you don't judge yourself, that's oftentimes when hot streaks happen. So I think I don't know, Shaan, I forget the phrase, but they call it in basketball where you're like on a streak. Yeah, you can't miss. And people always say, well, don't pull them out. Like, let them just go. And that's that moment where you're listening to self too, and you're just feeling it. And what you described is exactly that.
Golf too. Like, I don't know if you guys golf, but like when you golf, most people when they golf, they have a swing thought, something they're working on, like, oh, get this. Like, it's always a swing thought. But I remember one time when my swing thought was this. My swing thought was nothing from nothing is nothing, which means nothing. Just swing. I would literally go over the ball and in my head, I'd sing the song. Nothing from nothing is nothing. Just let the body do it. Because when you're over technical, over analyzing and all that kind of stuff, it can actually be a detriment. And that's
Isn't that funny? You're describing this, you're this author saying the exact same thing. That's so fascinating to me.
Yes. And it's true in poker too. You see a move and you're like, oh, I don't know, but do I need to take this risk? I mean, I don't know. It seems kind of crazy. It might work, but might not. I mean, instead of just being like, and frankly, and this is a secret weapon that I don't use too often, but it really helps, is alcohol. Okay. I'm not saying you should drink and play, but there was a guy named Bill Smith many years ago. They said when he was sober, he was the easiest, weakest player in the game. When he was drunk, he was just a sloppy mess. He couldn't win. But when he was just a little buzzed, just a little drunk, they said he was the best player in the world, right? Why would that be? Because with poker, alcohol can lower your inhibition a little bit. So you're just going to go trust your instinct. And whenever I've done that, I feel like it's almost like a superpower because it allows you to sort of get past the fear and the rationalization for why you shouldn't take this risk. And that's all going against what your instincts are saying is going to work, right? So having that little bit of, learning to create that and trust that without alcohol is the ideal goal. And that's what we all strive for. And I've actually gotten a lot better at that just naturally, just by just saying, okay, listen, if you think this is probably right, forget about all these other reasons that it's not. Just do it, man. Just do it.
I'm writing this book right now on creativity and getting into creative flow. And in the research, I'm looking at, in writers and authors, it's amazing. These guys are drunks. These guys are all drunks. And they would wake up and they had this discipline part, which is wake up and immediately start writing. But they're like, yeah, our best work was also when we added this other habit where we wake up and right before we start writing, we do the whiskey part, or we start drinking. And there's another analogy to this, which is actually kind of an interesting thing about napping. And so there's this famous study that was called the Paris sleep study. And it's similar, like you get in a state of mind where your inhibition is lower, and you don't self-censor. So we all have this sort of editor in our head, like in a game of tennis, like the ump sitting on the tower. We all have that sort of ump who's calling balls in and out. And when you say something, you censor. If you're doing a golf swing, you start to think, you start to censor what you're doing. And if you can get that censor to just shut up and trust yourself, you actually do a lot better. And so they did this thing in the Paris sleep study. They gave people a very complicated pattern, like a math pattern, like a number pattern. And, let's say 10% of people solved it right away. Great, you guys are done. Congratulations. Here's some chocolate. You guys are out. The rest of the people, they basically let them work at it for something like an hour. And they were all like stuck. They're like, I can't see this pattern. I don't know what the hell it is. So they split the group into 2 rooms. They're like, hey, we're going to take a quick break, a sort of 20, 30-minute break. You guys go over here and hang out in the waiting room, do whatever you want. And they took the other group, the other half, and they put them they said, hey, we'd like you to go ahead and take a nap. So you're going to lay down in a calm environment. You're going to take a nap. They took a nap for about 25, 26 minutes. And then when they woke up, they all went back in the room. And the group that had napped basically had a 3 times higher rate of just solving the problem right when they got in. And there's a state that, and there's all these great, Edison used to nap, and Einstein used to nap, and all these guys used to nap, and they would famously nap with like a spoon in their hand because they didn't want to sleep for a long time. They wanted to get into that state where you just start to fall asleep, and then when you fall asleep, you drop the spoon, it would clang, and then you'd wake up. And they would use that state, which is called a hypnagogic state, where you actually are way more creative, and you're in you can get into a flow much more easily than if you were just in your normal pattern.
That's super fascinating.
Yeah, that's wow. I mean, my first thought was that just like obviously sleep in general for poker is the most important thing. It's like it's like if our mind is a computer, it's the time where it shuts down and it reboots and you downloads all the information so that you're ready to do it the next day. I remember hearing that with some they did similar things where they like did some tests with people where they had them, do this test morning, night, and then sleep, and then next morning. And, the results the next morning were always better than, the previous night or whatever. So I didn't know that napping could do that or this flow state or the state idea, but that sounds cool because I like, I'm a big fan of naps. When we used to go to Europe and play, the jet lag thing, sometimes I'd be at the table with my, like a head down and I keep a hand out and, then I could feel the dealer throw the card on my finger and I was starting to wake up.
You mentioned at the beginning, you said, I went to a course or a seminar about emotional intelligence. And that's not what I expected you to say. That sounds like, I don't know. I thought you would talk about poker and math and stats and all that stuff. That's pretty fascinating. Why did you go and what did you get out of that?
Yeah, it was in Vegas. I did it in 2013. My manager, Brian, who's just a super healthy, perfect wife, 3 great kids, like lawyer guy, all buttoned up. He did it, right? And we were playing golf and he said, you should try this thing. And I thought to myself, okay, well, I trust him, right? So he thinks it might have some value. I'll say, I'll go. What's the word? I'm always looking to learn and do different things. It was nothing like I expected it to be. This was no business seminar, if you will. This was a deep dive into what makes you tick, where you decided certain things about yourself, what works about you, what doesn't work about you. And it was a life-changing experience in a lot of ways for me, right? I hated it in the first couple of days, but because I had faith in Brian, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna stick with it. It's transformational in so many ways. And really some of the key tenets of what I learned there was just the difference between being a victim to circumstance and responsible completely for everything and everything for where you are and all the decisions you make, right? You're not responsible for the weather. You're not responsible for a car crash, but you're responsible for your response to it. Right? And the word responsible, when you break it down, is essentially response able. So the difference between those that succeed and those that fail often are how they respond to things. And there's one story I remember that they told, and it's true, actually. There were 2 mothers that had the same thing happen to them. They had their child killed in a car accident. Horrifying experience, right? The first mother was grieving, obviously, expected. She drank. She had other children. She had a husband, and, she stayed in that depression 6 months, a year later, and lost her family, right? Which is sad. And you can look at that and you can empathize. Well, yeah, of course, right? The other mother had the exact same thing happen to her. She grieved, took her time, and then she started an organization called Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So she said, okay, I'm going to take this. I'm going to respond to this in a way where I'm going to help other people, right? So the event was the same, right? It was a neutral event. The event was, happened to both people, but the response to the event led these lives in a very different trajectory because of how they were responding to it. So learning that with poker is incredibly important, right? Because you're going to have bad luck sometimes and good luck. How you respond to it is going to be the difference between you being successful and you being a failure.
One of my biggest things that I've learned from Shaan is I for years I thought, well, I'm very good at that. I know that I am responsible for my own outcomes. I believe that fully. And one day I think I was in a bad mood and he was like, well, why are you in the bad mood? And I said, this person did this and it pissed me off. He's like, well, so you're not responsible for your mood. What's going on? Like this person just, that's when it like clicked. And frankly, it's still really hard, but it was like having that internal locus of control isn't just for like making money or starting a business. It's also for how do I feel on the inside? And that was the biggest thing. Shaan, what do you say? Like you have some like different version of someone living rent free in your brain. Like you have all these like phrases where it's like
the one that stuck with me. I went to a Tony Robbins thing. It's very similar. Like I kind of intuitively knew, hey, like I'm a learner. I'm a curious guy. I always want to improve. Why would I not invest in this? Then I get there. And he's like, all right, everybody stand up. I want to hear you. And I'm like, oh God, I'm here just for the learning part. I don't need to dance, right? And then like 5 minutes in, I had a choice, a fork in the road. It's like, you're either going to play full out here, you're going to like do the experience, or you're going to have to do the experience and get half the results. I was like, whatever, let me do this. Nobody here knows me. I can just
we're
be
dancing.
silly. Let me dance. And then, of course, 45 minutes in, I'm dancing. I'm like, this is amazing. This is so good. And he says this thing in his talk. He's like, I'm fucking Tony Robbins. And he's like, he tells the story of when he was on his trip with his like platinum. Like, you bought all the upsells. You're paying him $250,000 a year to go on vacation with him. And he was with them in India. And he meets this guy in a mountain, some guru guy or whatever. And the guy said, Tony, so like, how much are you suffering nowadays? He's like, sorry, I don't know if you know me. I'm Tony Robbins. Suffering isn't exactly how people describe me typically, right? And the guy was like, well, I can see, like you got upset because the guy didn't know the schedule, and then you got upset about this. Like these were small things. He's like, well, no, I wasn't upset. He starts to be defensive, and then he calms down. He's like, what do you like? What's the observation you have here? He goes, basically, he's like, how cheap is your happiness? Because all it took was this guy forgetting one thing on the schedule and you lost it. That was so cheap. It took him nothing to take your happiness away. And so this idea of like, your mood is essentially, you want the Louis Vuitton of moods. You want it to be so premium. Like for somebody to affect your mood, to take your mood away from you, it should come with a very, very high price. And so I started to reframe, like when something would happen, I'm like, that's too cheap. I'm not going to take that deal. Why would I ever trade my good mood for that small thing?
No, I actually love that. That's really good. Because I think we all strive to be like, be above that, but we're human, right? Like I get annoyed by the dumbest things. I'm going to use that today. Cause like I said, I do streams where sometimes I'm sitting there and you get comments. I get thousands of comments like while I'm streaming, and the brain, I've already known this, but like we naturally going to gravitate toward the negative comment. The one who calls me a bald idiot or whatever. Right. So, so instead of like, I've learned this a long time ago, but like allowing that to affect you and to sort of, divert the stream, it's like kind of like what they're wanting to do. But I've learned to just like sort of respond to positive reinforcement and good stuff and ignore it. But when, let's say, for example, I play a hand and I lose, and I'm already frustrated by the fact that I lost the hand, but I'm comfortable with how I played it. And then you read a bunch of armchair quarterbacks saying, oh, what an idiot. Just gave all his money away. That was terrible. You're the worst. And I see that and I want to go, oh, really? Sam 65934, come here and say that to my face. How about that? I would bust you. I'd take all your money. And I sometimes do that, but it's silly, like you said, because why am I allowing this?
Well, sometimes it feels good. Like I trick myself into thinking it feels good. And the reality is it doesn't feel good because I'm like, I'm refreshing the page. I'm like, let me see the reply. Let me see. No, I can't go out to dinner yet. This guy on Facebook said something. I got to wait for his reply.
I will say this though. I am a big fan of venting, like in the sense that like rather than hold stuff in, and let it bubble and let it fester, I laugh at myself sometimes when I act like an idiot. I'm like, I get mad about something dumb and I'm like, okay, that was okay. And then I could like very quickly after I can go, okay, that was stupid. But I got it off my chest. You know what I mean? Like I see the river card come and I lose. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? How did I lose this? Whatever. And I can laugh at how unhinged I was behaving. But it's not going to be, it's not, but it's now not something that I'm just going, okay, everything's fine. Sure.
Right.
Whatever.
It's better than
I think there's some
repressing it.
value in sometimes just letting it out.
Well,
Like
Shaan, you had that thing in the 5 Tweet Tuesday the other day where it was what was the name of it? It started with a K, something theory, which states that like if you write something down, if you have a problem and you just take the
Kidlan's law was basically like a problem well defined. Like if you write down a problem, you've already half solved it. Right? Like if you actually can write it down accurately, what is the problem? You are already halfway to a solution at that point. Danny, I want to ask you about this one thing from that seminar, because when I was thinking about the Tony Robbins experience, they'll tell you something, but it's usually like an exercise you do. There's some like thing you do that you wouldn't have wanted to do, but now you're sitting in the room and you signed up to be there and you paid the money and now you're here. So you go ahead and you do it. And you kind of have this like moment of enlightenment that really only happened because you were actually immersed in it. You actually did a thing versus just listening to like an idea and you know it intellectually, but you didn't get to actually feel it. Did they do anything? Was there an exercise that stood out to you?
there's tons. So yeah, the one that I did is called Choice Center, and there are plenty of people. There's a lot of crossover between Anthony Robbins himself and people that have done both, and there's a lot of similarities. And sounds like in what you were doing, but as far as one specific one, I think sort of the root of that whole victim responsible idea, the concept is that I remember there was a girl when she was young and she was partying whatever, and we were together. I loved her, whatever, but like we broke up, okay, and I had a story about how I was the victim. About how she did this, she was bad and all these types of things. So one of the exercises we did was we tell the story as a victim, okay? Now you must retell the exact same story where you're 100% responsible for everything that happened. Whoa, right? So now I have to retell it. And all of a sudden, well, she did tell me this. She did say this. And all of a sudden, I'm freed. I'm freed of this victim story that's been a label to me as like, woe is me, poor me. I'm like, no. The signs were there. The choices were not, the choices were there. And I'll say this, after I did this course in 2013, this woman who I was in love with in 2010, 11, okay, she came back to Las Vegas in 2000. I even bought her a ring back then. I never gave her in 2010, 11. And I kept it in my safe for some reason. She came back to Vegas in 2019 and we're married now 6 years. Yeah, we're married. She's, yeah. So, but a lot of that came from me sort of reevaluating the story that I had told myself, right? So, that was probably one of the more impactful ones. And it's a long it's like 100-day process, this course. You go to one weekend and, it's pretty intense, another weekend and
You stuck with it. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you're doing coaching calls, you're doing you actually learn how to coach other people. And, you sort of was speaking to this about writing down stuff, because that's part of it, the idea behind journaling as well. But one of the things on that note, like sometimes when I would coach other people, you find that like one of the questions you ask is like, say you came to me for coaching on something. And I said, well, how would you coach yourself on this? Right? So then as you do that and you're like, well, I would probably tell myself this, and this. And then I just look at you and go, there you go.
Right.
You already know the answer, right? It's just like, but a good coach, what they do is they help ask good questions that sort of help, get you to a place where I don't think a good coach is one that tells you what to do. A good coach is to set you up where you tell me, I'm helping you see what's possible so that you get there.
I like that a lot. When you, one of the things about poker is handling downswings. And I think that's not just a thing about poker, that's a thing about life. Now in poker, it's just very immediate and it's very quantified. I lost this much money just now. My buddy, back in college when I used to gamble a lot, me and my buddy Dan, we would go to Vegas and we would go lose a bunch of money. And we, every once in a while we'd make enough money to keep us coming back to Vegas, but most of the time I would say we didn't do well. And I just remember him, the psychology of losing money is it gets you to act so strange. So one thing you were talking about was like you chase the loss. I remember going back up to the room. He's going to the ATM machine. It's like, bro, don't do it. But he wants to do it. And then he would lose money and then he would try to get the pit boss to like comp him a breakfast or the room to like just salvage some dignity out of it. Or he would come back to the room and he would use all the toiletries and wear the robe as if he was getting the value back out of what he just lost. And he would look in the mirror in the hotel. I remember he thought we were asleep. And he just goes, 5 iPhones. You lost 5 iPhones. He's hating himself in the mirror. And I just remember thinking like, man, we focus so much time, me and him, we used to focus so much time on the strategy of how to win. And what actually we needed to be spending time on is the psychology of how to lose, because there were always going to be downswings. And we handled them so poorly that our strategies went out the window. And so I'm curious, Daniel, like, what is the strategy of handling adversity or these downswings? What do you tell yourself, and what do you think is applicable to people outside of the world of poker?
The downswings are probably the most important part of, like, how you deal with them is the most important part of becoming a professional poker player. And for me, I learned over the years, you call them a breakdown, right? And typically with like a breakdown, things are going badly. That's an opportunity for a breakthrough. When things are going fine, right? You're probably not really delving that much into your strategy. You're like, okay, things are good, you know? But when things are going badly and things are going wrong, it requires you to be more introspective. You have to go, okay, what is really happening here? Let me dive deep. Is what I'm doing working? You know, is there anything I can do better? What strategies can I adjust? What strategies can I chase? And those usually come from breakdowns, whether it's in poker downswings or life, right? Like when you're in a downswing in your life with whatever else, that's an opportunity for a breakthrough. You either say, okay, this is the point where I'm at. Am I going to accept where I'm at, you know, and just woe is me? Or is now the time to reinvent myself, to try a new angle or try to do things differently to get myself to a better place? And often, you know, people call it rock bottom, right? So if you're an addict or something, you know, that's getting by, people look at that and say, well, this person's not gonna be helped until they hit rock bottom. Because what's rock bottom? Rock bottom is the decision point. This is it, right? I'm either gonna die here like this, or, you know, some change has to happen.
There's a quote from J.K. Rowling about this. I don't know, have you guys ever heard her talk about rock bottom?
No,
So J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter and, you know, billionaire author, right? So she said this thing about when I think she had been rejected. And so she said, I was set free because my greatest fear had already been realized. I was still alive. I still had a daughter I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life.
That's beautiful. That's so well said. And yeah, essentially encapsulates what we're sort of talking about, where I think like the most impactful stages of your life, and like for me too, even with the like going to that course, right? It required me to be in a place where I had that lost love, that breakup, that painful experience of, you know, losing someone that I loved. And I was at a low point. So I went out and I said, okay, well, let's do something. And then boom, completely shifted my relationship with that event. And then eventually became the man that could look past, you know, our differences back then and realize like I'm responsible for this relationship working. And now we're happily married, you know, and I constantly think of those things. Like it was one of those courses. I don't know if it's similar for you with the Tony Robbins thing, but I still use in practice a lot of the things that I learned there on a daily basis. Like I'm not perfect by any stretch. I still have my bad times, but I recognize them more quickly. When I'm being an idiot or a jerk or arrogant or whatever, I notice it faster, you know, and I'm able to shift out of it.
It's like, I remember thinking afterwards, I was like, dude, I feel like Neo in the Matrix, but I thought that was like, you know, in Neo Matrix, he's seeing everybody else, but it's actually just seeing yourself. It's like, you see, oh, I'm just acting this way because of this thing. Oh, I'm saying these words. Instead of saying I have to go do this, I get to go do this, right? Little shifts, right? Little like two word shift, right? Like, oh, I gotta go, I have to go pick up my kids. No, I get to go pick up my kids from school right now on this bike, and we're gonna spend time like, this is amazing. You know, me 5 years ago, what killed for this? And now it's a have to. What's going on here? And so you get curious about those things. So I totally agree with that. And you know, I think we came onto this podcast thinking like, hey, there's gonna be some poker lessons, you know, as in like, oh, we can learn about, you know, poker and the art of bluffing and reading and all of that. But you know, this turned into a podcast about the mind, right?
Right.
Can I ask you about your content diet? What do you read and listen to on a daily or weekly basis? Because I find your attitude interesting, and I want to be inspired by the same things that inspire you.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, nothing recently, but one of the books that I loved, it was such a simple book. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's called The Four Agreements.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about it.
It's such an easy read. You'll read it in 5 seconds. It's 4 basic principles. Number 1, be impeccable with your word to yourself and others. Number 2, Don't take anything personal. And number 3, don't make assumptions. And number 4, do your best. Do your best is the most important one, because the idea behind it is those 3 things you're going to fail at sometimes, right? But as long as you're doing your best, you're in a good place. And the one, being impeccable with your word, that I take so seriously, not just for others and for myself, to the point where if I said to you guys, I'm going to be here at 9 a.m., if I was here at 9:04, I'd feel like it's a broken agreement that I did not keep my word, right? Many people go through life and they just show up at 9:04 and it's like, hey, what's up, guys? Don't acknowledge the fact that we had an agreement. You failed on this agreement and you didn't even say anything. Listen, sometimes it's going to happen. You're going to be 5 minutes late, right? What does a responsible person do? Listen, I acknowledge I'm late. I'm very sorry about that. No excuses. Don't tell me about your kid and the hairdryer. I'm committed to, in the future, making sure that I'm on time. That you can respect, right? But somebody who's just always 15, 20 minutes late and thinks it's no big deal, they're disrespecting your time. And I don't trust their word when they say to me, I'll be there at 9.
I'm terrible at that. Not just the timing thing, but the keeping your word to yourself. I'm pretty good actually about keeping my word to other people, but keeping my word to myself is like, well, I'm the judge, the jury, and the executioner. So, I can always let myself off the hook. Like I have a food coach, so I'm trying to get in great shape. And obviously I had a personal trainer, but most of getting in great shape is controlling, what you eat. And so she calls me every day at 10:45, and she says like, hey, like, how did yesterday go? We have to talk through it. It's food therapy basically for 10 minutes a day, every morning. And in that, there's all these little things where it's like, I tell her, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm deciding I'm going to do this. I'm going to have this at this time. And then tonight, I'm not going to late night snack or anything. I'm going to get to bed on time. Next day, I did, see the thing, there was all these crackers out and I didn't even actually think about it, but I was actually kind of hungry and there's all these compromises. And she was just like, the amount of energy, she let me kind of realize man, it's not about the crackers or the chips that you're having. Sure, that's not going to kill you. Those chips are not going to kill you. But being the guy who breaks his word to himself all the time, that actually will kill you. You will let yourself down and not even trust yourself because you don't believe what you say. And that has been ironically, one of the things that I've struggled the most at and I'm trying to overcome this year. And if I do that, it's wow, then I do learn to play the piano better and I do better with my companies. I do better with this because I become a type of person who I trust myself that if I say something, that's what it's going to be. And that I won't renegotiate and relitigate these things myself. And the problem is I'm a very persuasive person, so I can persuade myself back into anything, but I don't want to use that skill against myself.
We have a bunch of guests on the pod. Shaan and I aren't particularly big investors or anything, but we love having investors on. We haven't had them on, but the most famous example of this is Warren Buffett and how he really can teach you about life via investing. And it's very evident that you are in that same category where it's not necessarily the poker thing that is the interesting part about you. Poker is just your vehicle for showing that you have mastery over your own emotions and your own, and you're a master in emotional intelligence. And so it's really cool to hear your perspective on these things because I'm not going to play poker, but you've said of many, many things that will change my life just in a non-poker field.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And like I said, I'm a big believer in sort of what you're saying is looking at successful people, listening to how they got there. There's value in there. This isn't me telling you this is what you need to do with your life. I'm sharing what's worked for me, right? And if you hear some of those things and you think, oh, you know what? That would be something that something beneficial for my life. That's kind of how I look at other successful people too.
We didn't get to talk about this, but I do, in the research this came up and I was like, that was really cool of him. So it's a compliment to you, which is you were talking about the young players. And you're like, I never wanted to be that guy who was the old head criticizing the way all the young players are playing now and how it's ruined the game and blah, blah, blah. And you've talked about, you said something like, I get really curious. I want to learn from them. I want them to coach me as much as I'm coaching them. And I thought, man, that's a great attitude. I see that in basketball that happens. It's sort of always criticizing the younger generation and just saying they don't get it. They've ruined the game. It's all changed. It's not the same anymore. And I thought that was a pretty cool attitude you had. And I wanted to give you a compliment on that.
Appreciate it. I remember where it really happened when I was 22, 23, and I was really grinding and I'm working hard and I'm playing with some big names, established guys. And I could see they were scoffing at some of the stuff I was doing. And under my breath, I'm like, buddy, I'm already better than you by a lot. You got that cocky young energy. And I reminded myself in that moment, never be the guy who's, the older guy who looks at the young and the different things they're doing and scoff and go, look at these dummies. So every 3 to 4 years, I'll update my own software, my mental software, by learning the things that they're learning. Now I combine that with the wisdom that I have of 30 years, and I become really powerful as a player. But it requires humility. Because let's say you're in the top in 2004 and you think you still are today, just because you rest on your laurels? No. The day you stop learning is the day everyone else starts to surpass you, because they're going to continue to learn and you're stuck here. New ideas, new solvers, new approaches, they're always going to advance. And if you don't advance with them, you get worse by definition, because everyone else is getting better.
That's awesome. Daniel, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
You got it, guys. It was fun.
All right. We appreciate you. That's it. That's the pod.